parenthood is not permanent. It happens quite often that while we think we understand what is the best for our children, it could very well happen that what you're pouring into their cups is actually your own idiosyncrasies, your own biases. Do not force yourself to become an ideal parent, because there is no such thing as an ideal parent. That is a fiction that simply does not exist. Hello, good people of the internet. Welcome to another book review in the Unlearning Playground Book Club by Chetan Naran. The book that I'm reviewing in today's episode is actually written by a guy who I consider to be one of my favorite teachers of all time. He goes by the name Osho. I hope you guys would have heard me talk about him in some of my previous videos. And the book that we're reviewing is The Book of Children by Osho. Now, when it comes to Osho, like a lot of other spiritual teachers of his time, he has not really written this book in the context of actually writing it down, penning it down word by word or line by line. It is actually a transcript of live sessions that he used to have with his students. And these books are really written in the form of question and answers, where his students would ask him questions and he would try to answer them to the best of his capabilities. And the questions and answers in this book are centered around the topic of parenting. So you would have real life parents asking him real life questions about their real life problems, and Osho would try to answer them honestly. Or you would have real life children talking about the issues they are facing with their parents, and again, Osho would try to answer them. I loved the entire format of the book. I could relate to a lot of the questions that people were asking in this book and the answers, especially that Osho has given them. So I think there's a lot of value to be derived from this book. I think, like all of my book review videos on this channel, you would see that this book has immense value for anyone who's ripe to receive it. And I think I would highly recommend everyone to read this book. Even if you're not a parent, you are most definitely a child. If neither of those conditions meet for you, you are most definitely going to benefit from it, because this book also has life lessons that can be applied even to your workplace at times, especially in situations where you are a caregiver for maybe your employees or maybe someone else. So at any rate, I think there is a lot of value to be derived from this book from for every single one of us. And what I would recommend again is for everyone to read this book by themselves. If you are moved enough to read it, there will be a link, like all of my videos, there will be an Amazon affiliate link in the description box below. Make sure that if you're buying the book, buy it via that link, because that helps to support the Unlearning Playground in a big way. And for today's video, what we'll do is I'll talk about a good few number of life lessons that I think everyone can benefit from via this book. So yes, let's get started. Life lesson number one that I derived from this book was centered around the complete perspective of the entire parent child relationship. And while Osho does not say it in these exact same words that I'm about to use, this is the vibe that honestly I got from his entire book. And that was, quite a lot of times parents can fall into the trap of considering that their children are empty cups, and their responsibility as parents is actually to pour into these empty cups. And the vibe I got from the entire book about parenting was that rather than considering your children to be empty cups, you should rather consider your relationship with them to be like that of a shepherd. So instead of considering your kids to be empty cups which you are pouring into, consider them to be sheep, and consider yourselves to be the shepherd whose main job is to take the sheep around into different kinds of pastures. Now, all of those pastures may not always be greener pastures, but your job, your primary responsibility is to make sure that the sheep go into different kinds of pastures to enable and foster their growth, and then let them be individual cells eventually, rather than forcing and pouring your own idiosyncrasies into the empty cups. Because it happens quite often that while we think we understand what is the best for our children, it could very well happen that what you're pouring into their cups is actually your own idiosyncrasies, your own biases. And the overall vibe that I received from this book was that the primary job of a caregiver or a parent should be to work on themselves, so that they do not end up transporting their own idiosyncrasies, their own biases to their children. and they should not consider their kids to be just empty cups who do not have individual selves almost, and you're supposed to simply pour into those empty cups. Parenting tip number 2 that Osho gave me in this book was centered around the topic of honesty. Osho tells very clearly that a parent should always be honest with their kids. Now, I do not quite remember the exact question that was asked by the questioner there, but what Osho was trying to convey was around the fact that it may so happen for a lot of parents that they end up believing that because they are the parents, because they are the primary caregivers, they are supposed to exude an air of confidence about everything in front of their children. Everything, even for things that they themselves are not sure about. Now, there may be value in doing that at times, but what it can also lead to is that your kids, when they grow up and they find out that you, as parents, were actually just simply being dishonest with them. You did not know yourself, but you were exuding an air of confidence as if you knew what you were talking about. And while your kids may end up excusing you, that will take a lot of unlearning on their part. But what can also happen is that your kids may end up completely losing interest in that entire subject, for that matter, feeling absolutely disenfranchised from that part of their life. And this is something that I think applies to such a big percentage of people my age, because I feel personally that a lot of kids of my generation were now actually are waking up to realize that their parents, their older generations, were simply being dishonest with them when it came to the topics of religion and spirituality and everything to do with all of those topics, philosophy even. Now, parents may not have had the time to delve into it themselves, but the kids waking up to realize that all the dogmas and all the rituals, all the spirituality that was shown in front of them was completely based out of dishonesty, actually has led to an entire generation of people who are feeling absolutely disenfranchised from the entire project itself, which has now led me to start this channel so that kids of my age, people of my age, can actually see what true spirituality, true religion is all about. So, yes, I think that is a very fair point, a very valuable point that can be applied to a lot of different scenarios in a parent child relationship. So, above all, try and be as honest with your kid as possible. And at least do not be dishonest, or at least do not lie to them about things that you yourself are not so sure of. Use an adult discernment. Life lesson number 3 from Osho is do not force yourself to become an ideal parent. Osho says in these exact same words in this book that do not force yourself to become an ideal parent, because there is no such thing as an ideal parent. That is a fiction that simply does not exist. So, when dealing with your kids, you have to let yourself be natural. You have to understand that you will commit mistakes when it will come to parenting, but allow yourself to do that. But make sure that you're working on yourself. So, that is one primary thing that I learned from this book. As a parent, your primary job, your first and foremost job is to keep working on yourself, because there will be a lot of times when you're parenting your kid that a lot of your toxic traits will come to the surface. This is something that even if you're not a parent, but you have been given a position of responsibility in your work or in any other sphere of your life, you would know that as soon as you're given charge of other people, there are a lot of different toxic traits of yours that come to the surface. And if you are a self aware person, you can keep working on yourself in the sense that you can realize that this is something that I do not need to act on. So relax, take a deep breaths, take a few deep breaths, and act despite of those toxic traits. When I talk about toxic traits, this is actually something that we should talk a little bit more about, because all of us, every single one of us, understands that there were times when we were being parented by our parents. There were a lot of different kinds of idiosyncrasies and traits of our parents that we didn't really like, that we especially hated, in fact. And it does so happen that a lot of those traits unconsciously get transferred to us as well. And we do not find out about them before we actually become parents ourselves. So, if you are in that situation, make sure that you understand that you will commit those same or similar mistakes with your kids. So let yourself do that. Do not force yourself into being an ideal parent, but keep working on yourself. Keep becoming more and more self aware so that you can break the cycle of those toxic traits being transferred to your kids. I think that is a beautiful life lesson that Osho gave me in this book. Before we go ahead, I have a request to make of you. If you're liking what you're seeing in this video, make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Make sure that if you plan on buying this book, buy it via the Amazon link down below in the description. And let's keep going. Another life lesson that I got from this book was a beautiful one, and that was children pay less attention to what you say, but more attention to what you are, or rather, how you do things. And by that, Osho means that if you yourself are a silent person, a compassionate, loving, joyous, meditative person, you will see, or rather, there is a higher probability that you will see your kids imbibing those qualities almost naturally. While on the other hand, if you merely tell or ask your kids to be compassionate towards others, to be patient and polite, and to be joyous and to be loving and caring, while what they see you behaving like, you're always stressed at work, you're always maybe even shouting at other people and not really being respectful of other people. If your kid ends up imbibing any of those positive traits, it will be despite of being parented by you, not because of you. So I think this is a very nice way to put it. If you want your kids to pay attention to things that you want them to become, exhibit those traits in yourself. So if you want your kids to read books. If you want your kids to be meditative, you be meditative. Kids pay more attention to what you are, to how you do things, rather than to what you say. Another parenting tip that I picked from this book is something that I think is fairly obvious to almost all discerning adults, but there is some caveat, of course, that needs to be discussed. The topic for that parenting tip is comparison with other kids. Now, almost all of us intuitively understand that you should not be comparing your kids with others, because you should not really be giving them, an inferiority complex. And while that is true, what may happen is that parents, in the wake of being caring parents, may end up comparing their kids with others and giving their kids a superiority complex. And Osho puts it in these exact same words in this book, that both inferiority and superiority are actually diseases of the mind. Both of them will end up only strengthening your kids' ego and strengthening their ego in things that they will eventually then have to unlearn to become whole adults. I mean, of course, I'm creating content on the Unlearning Playground, so you can refer your kids here. But I think this is a good parenting tip to be considered. Do not compare your kids with other kids, both in terms of making them feeling inferior or superior. But I think you can refer them to the Unlearning Playground anyway. The next life lesson that I want to talk about from this book is something that I quite loved when Osho talked about sacrifice. Now, this is something that is not really very easy to explain, but I'll try my best. What Osho described in this book was that in the wake of being caring parents, it may so happen that parents end up sacrificing themselves for their kids, in the sense that they may end up considering that their needs, as in the parents' needs, are second to the child's need. Now, while there are definitely some practical situations where this is a possibility and a parent needs to do that, if the parent is not self-aware enough, this trait, this self-sacrifice, can end up becoming toxic very soon. So the life advice would again circle back to what we talked about quite initially in this video, that the primary responsibility of a parent is to keep working on themselves, to keep becoming more self-aware of their own psyche, their own conditioning, their own mind, so that when self-sacrifice becomes a toxic trait, they can control their actions and they can control how they are acting out in front of their kids and elsewhere too. Now, when I say that self sacrifice becomes toxic, there are a few things that you can quite clearly see. I would want to talk about them to actually help you understand this better. if a parent has sacrificed, has done quite a lot for their kids, it may so happen that the parent may end up expecting the same from the kids when the parent grows old. Now, there's nothing completely wrong with it, but to expect a self sacrifice from someone else can very easily lead to strained relationships, especially these expectations that are not really explicitly said out but are implicitly expected. And there is one more scenario where you can very easily see that this kind of a self sacrifice can become extremely toxic. And that is when your kid enters into a relationship, when your kid ends up having a partner, and you as a parent now expect your partner to exhibit all of those same sort of self sacrificial traits that you raised up your kid with. Now, this is something that Osho, I'm not sure if he used these exact same words, but he does give this idea that the sacrifice that a parent has to do for their kids can turn toxic if the parent is not self aware enough. So, while this entire point was around the topic of self sacrifice, the key life advice from the entire section is for the parent to become more self aware so that they can see whenever these toxic traits are coming up to the surface, and so that they can act despite of these traits, not because of them. The final parenting tip that I would want to talk about from this book is, in my opinion, the most important one. Yes, I saved the best for the last, and that parenting tip is centered around letting go. The idea that parenthood is not permanent. There will come a point in your life when you have to unlearn your attachment to being a parent, where you have to let go of your child so that he or she can be a separate self. And very similar to how at some stage in your life you have to let go of being a child and have to become an adult, you also have to let go of being a parent and let your child be a separate self and live and lead their own life. Now, this is something that I think is quite hard for people to grasp their head around, but this is something which is true. And I think this is something that should be shared with every parent, every child, every adult who's not a parent but is planning to be one, or even every adult who at some point in their life may end up holding a position of power or responsibility over other people. They need to understand that you have to let go of that power at some point of time. Well, okay, then. I think I covered quite a lot of what I wanted to talk about from this book. Make sure you like this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and make sure you read this book for yourself too. I'll see you in the playground the next time. Until next time, peace out.